Good evening, train fans. This is Grandpa 55 coming at you with another TRAINZ adventure. Tonight we're going to do the second scenario in the CSX Saginaw Subdivision. And tonight we're going to be doing nocturnal navigation. In the first one we did the strain of grain, where we took a string of covered hoppers from Flint, Michigan, south toward Toledo. The scenario actually stops right around Carleton, Michigan, which is just a little bit south and west of the Detroit area. Tonight we're going to be doing the cab mode, so I'm going to play around with that tonight, and I know it's going to be a little bit challenging because I'm not really proficient at operating trains that way, but we'll have some fun and I'll probably make some mistakes along the way. So tonight we're doing basically the return trip. We're simulating that we've left Toledo about an hour ago. We're now around Carleton heading north toward Flint. Detroit is off to our right there in the distance, and basically this scenario reads, good morning. It's just past 4 a.m. and we are an hour into our trip on train Q322 from Toledo, Ohio to Flint, Michigan. We just have the simple task of hauling this heavy train into McGrew Yard in Flint by dawn. This train is very heavy and we will be climbing uphill for most of the trip, so it's important you watch your controls so we do not stall anywhere on the line. Traffic is pretty light this morning, so we do not expect to be put on any siding for other trains. When coming to McGrew Yard, you will need to throw MCG over 2 switch to have the signal into McGrew Yard. Park your train on track 1, uncouple the locomotives, and locate them in the sheds to complete your job. You will need to throw a switch or 2 in McGrew Yard to finish your work. It's time to get going. We have all green signals ahead to light up the night. So without further ado, let's jump in the cab and get our train ready. Now tonight, like I said, I'm going to be using essentially what is the equivalent of these controls right here. A little bit more challenging than what I did last time, where I did the DCC control, which is more or less like running an electric train set on your floor in the living room or something like that. This one we're actually going to be using a keyboard, but we're going to be doing the equivalent of operating with these levers here the way an actual railroad engineer would. So you can see this lever right here is your reversing lever. So you throw that forward, you go forward, you throw that this way and it goes into reverse. We've got the throttle, dynamic brake lever, train brake, and independent brake. Kind of interesting, the trains have 3 sets of brakes on your train, so different ways of getting this huge heavy train to come to a stop. So anyways, let's get going. First of all, we need to put it into forward, and I'm going to do that with the F key, and you'll see this lever go forward. And now we're going to give it some gas. So let's take a look and see what that looks like. The W key is the throttle, and you can see that's notching forward. And we'll release the brakes. As the brake pressure bleeds out of the system, we start to move forward. So we got a big old heavy train. First thing we want to do is take the slack out of the couplers before we start really going. And now we'll give it some gas. And we're off to the races. I think that guy's going to lose the front of his car. Oh well, things happen. I'm sure he's got good insurance. So we're going to watch our speed. Now one thing that I'm doing now is, like I said, using the realistic controls, and unlike the DCC controls, which were very simple, I mean, I throw it forward, we go forward, put it in neutral, and it automatically brakes the train, put it in reverse, and we go backwards. This one I actually have to throw the levers, and the way we're operating the train now, this thing has some serious momentum. You can see the throttle lever in the top right in this area here is only at 3, and we are still cruising at 38 miles an hour. So we are really hauling the mail. I'm going to concentrate a little bit more on actually operating the train, so less so on the horns and those signals. I'll try to get them in if I can remember, but no guarantees. This is a little bit taxing because I really haven't operated trains this way before, so I got to really pay attention to speeds and speed limits.
Detector milepost 0.0. Detector milepost 0.0.
So we're up to 40 miles an hour.
Axles 1, 4.
And I've got the throttle all the way back pretty much to 1.
Detector out.
And you really get a sense for the weight and momentum of this train. Our next speed limit in about 1.5 miles is 35 miles an hour, so we got to
0.0. No defects. Total axles 1, 4.
really pay attention to that and see how best we can slow this train down. Now, there's 3 ways of braking a train, a real train, and the first one is just the locomotive brakes. The horn going here. The locomotive brakes applies the brakes to the drive wheels on the locomotive, and all the cars behind you are just along for the ride, and it's up to the locomotive wheels to actually get the whole thing slowed down, whether you're going down a hill or slowing down for a speed limit like we will be in just over 1 mile. The second type of brake is called a dynamic brake, and that is kind of like downshifting in your car. Let me get the horn again. Roads for the price of one. Now we seem to be going pretty fast for making these turns. We've got about 1 mile to go. Dynamic braking uses the power of the locomotive engine to slow the train down. And essentially the way locomotives work, they're not like your regular car, where the engine is hooked up to the wheels by a drive shaft. Basically, we've got a 3,000 horsepower, and let me put this into idle. I might have to hit some brakes here to get slowed down, and I'm sure I will about 1/2 mile away. So anyways, behind me in the cab here, you can imagine there's a 3,000 horsepower, 16-cylinder diesel engine that's powering this rig along the way. And like I said, it's not a drive shaft down to the wheels. It actually is hooked up to an alternator. As the diesel engine spools up, it's spinning the alternator, which creates electricity. It goes through a couple of converters along the way and eventually sends a DC signal to the drive wheels. And remember, in the train we're operating tonight, which is the EMD40-2, there's total of 6 wheels on the front, 6 wheels on the back, and those are what actually propel this train along the rails. Now the dynamic braking is basically the electric motors resisting being turned, so that as I apply dynamic brakes, the wheels don't want to turn. It just makes them really sluggish to turn, and that's another way of braking this train. So we've got the regular shoe type brakes that clamp onto the wheel, slow it down. We've got electric motors that can resist the turning of the wheels electrically to slow it down. And then probably the most efficient for a big long train like this is the normal, I guess they call it lap braking. I'm sure you've all seen that railroad cars are connected to each other through the knuckles, the couplers, but they right by those knuckles they also have these hoses, and one hose plugs into the car in front and behind. Well, those are air hoses, and basically what happens is as the diesel motor turns over, it's actually compressing air into a storage tank in the cab or the box behind me where the engine is. And then that compressed air is fed through these hoses to every car on the train. So we've got a 40-mile-an-hour speed limit here, and we won't be able to speed up until the end of the train passes that. So anyways, this air compressor then passes the air back to every car on the train, and every car on the train has its own little cylinder of compressed air. And what that does through a valve is sense that pressure in those hoses that connects basically a closed system. If for any reason the pressure in those lines go down, that valve signals the compressed air to release air and apply the brakes on that car. And in that way, every car in this train can actually help slow the train down, which is a much more efficient way of doing it. If I'm just using the train to slow down this big old train, the locomotive to slow down this big old train, it's not the most efficient way of doing that. So even though this locomotive is very heavy and it's very powerful, there's a lot more weight and momentum behind me. And if I can use every one of those cars back here to help me slow down and brake, that's the most efficient way of doing that. And this is a fail-safe system. If for some reason the hose becomes disconnected, or it breaks, or cuts, or something along those lines, that automatically sends a signal. Going way too fast for this turn. Hopefully I won't flip over. Wasn't paying attention there. If for any reason that hose breaks, that valve senses a drop in pressure, and it's fail-safe because should the cars pull apart for any reason, one of them derails, falls off the track, whatever, it then sends a signal to the rest of the cars because of that drop in pressure to apply the brakes. And that's what is meant by fail-safe. So I'm still going a little bit fast. Apply the brake engine here. Alright, now we got it back under control, kind of, sort of. I don't think we did too much damage along the way. Again, I'm just learning about all this train stuff. There's a lot of things to pay attention to. Speed limits, trying to talk to you guys, remembering which keys to press, which brakes to use, and all that kind of stuff. So now we're kind of cruising at 16 miles an hour. So anyways, those are the three different types of train brakes. Regular disc type brakes that tap onto the wheels, slow it down. Dynamic brakes that use electric power to resist the turning of the wheels, also done at the locomotive level. And then the lap brakes, which through air pressure and air hoses get every car on the train to help contribute to slowing the train down. And a big, long, heavy train like this in the United States, it's not unusual to have, 100 cars on a train. It's the most efficient way to stop the train. So here I got the throttle of 1 and we're still accelerating. We've gone up to 20 miles an hour. Apply the brake to just come back down. Well, I did some research on this particular route, and in my first video we went the opposite direction, and I was guessing it was somewhere between 150 and 200 miles to get from Flint, Michigan to Toledo, Ohio. I actually went on Google Maps and kind of did a route survey kind of thing, and trying to get it as close as possible to the railroad route. Distance is actually 107 miles, not quite as far as I thought it was. The thing you'll notice about this scenario, it only goes to Carleton, from Flint to Carleton. And on Google Maps, that distance is about, I think, 90 miles. as I recall, 92 miles maybe. Well, you'll see that we only actually drive about 16 miles on this scenario, so you can tell that it's greatly compressed here in this simulator. So it's not to scale by any means, and I think as a result of that, especially in the area that we just went through, we were passing roads very quickly. Now that may happen in real life as well, but I think it might be a little bit accelerated. I don't think real engineers on this route would be passing those roads that quickly, but maybe they are, I don't know. So my next speed limit is 30 miles an hour in about 3 miles. We're kind of keeping the train under control. One thing you'll notice between this simulator and the other train simulator, I don't get graded on my performance. I don't get points taken off for speeding, at least in this scenario. I don't get points taken off for not blowing my horn. And in this scenario, it doesn't automatically stop if I blow through a red signal. There are some scenarios in this game, TRAINZ 2010, that actually do all those things. So if you go through a red signal, it automatically terminates that scenario and you get to go back and try it again until you get it right. So I guess it just depends on who designed it and how much effort they wanted to put into it. But this particular scenario, I can just obey all the rules and not blow the horn. I can have my light off and go 40 miles an hour the whole way as long as I don't run off the track. This particular scenario, the way it's designed, they don't care. I think it's a little bit more challenging, a little bit more interesting if I did get some feedback from this scenario designer. So, decent point to all those folks out there who are thinking about designing things. Now you can see on the top right here, the throttle's way back at 2, yet we have no problems maintaining our speed of 35 miles an hour. Now supposedly it's like 4 o'clock in the morning, yet look at all the people that are out driving around. What are they doing? Where are they going? I've got the throttle down to 1 because we accelerated to 37, even with the throttle way down at 2. So again, we can use these keys to kind of look around different windows in the cab. We can look out the back side. And we can see the train behind us. Passing over a river there. Now we have a green over red over red. Just doing a little bit more research, and I looked up the CSX signals. There's actually a couple sites online you can actually go out and look at what the actual signals are for the CSX system. For the most part, I think the way they've modeled them in this scenario, it's pretty accurate. Not quite 100% in all respects, but I think the intention is pretty easy to decipher and say, yeah, I think that's what they mean. Let me tell you, there's a lot of signals that engineers have to be aware of to operate their train safely. Not just jump in the cab, sit back, drink some coffee, and follow the rails since you're really not steering. These guys really have to be on their game, controlling the speed of the train as they're going through turnouts, as they're going down gradients and uphills so that they don't stall or go too fast. They got to be careful when they start going so they don't pull the knuckles or the couplers out of the cars. So there's quite a bit of slack in a train that's 100 cars long, so it's like playing crack the whip. The first car's not too bad, but by the time you get to that last car in the train, there's a lot of force that's being put on that coupler, and you could literally pull it right out. So right now I'm just kind of modulating the throttle up and down so that I don't go too fast. And in about a third of a mile, we have to be at 30 miles an hour. We're going to try slowing down with just the engine brakes here. We only have a couple miles an hour to go. We'll call it good. So we've pretty much made our limit. In about 1 mile, we're going to have to be down to 20 miles an hour. Speed is still pretty well under control. This is definitely more of a thinking man's game when you have to use the realistic cab controls. You know, if it's an electric chain, you just turn the throttle up and you go, and when you want to slow down, you turn it back. This is, okay, how am I going to do this? Because right now, we're essentially just coasting. I mean, the throttle's at 1, and we are just coasting with this massive train, just kind of gliding down the rails here. Try to keep it as close as we can to 27 miles an hour. We've gone just under 10 miles, so we are over halfway on our route here. And let's put back into idle because we've got to get down to 20 miles an hour in about a third of a mile. I was thinking when I first saw these cars that were passing on this siding on the left there, I thought those were auto racks, and I said, if those are auto racks, they're awful short. But in reality, I think what they are is covered gondolas. Maybe they got steel or something like that on the inside.
Detector milepost 0.0.
To modify my speed here, I only have to lose a couple miles an hour. I've been using the locomotive brake without having to resort to the lap braking. You know, I don't want all those brakes to be stopping me real quick, so I've just been using the locomotive brake. I haven't used any of the dynamic braking at all. It's been strictly the engine at this point. Now, as I get up close to the yard, which in about another 6 miles or so, and I'm going to use the lap braking to bring us to a stop. I could probably do it with the engine brakes as well. I started early enough. I'm going to try using the lap brake once we get up there. I was reading online that one of the problems using the lap brake system is that if you apply the brakes, you know, it drains that cylinder of compressed air on each car just a little bit. And it takes a while to charge. In fact, I think when an engineer gets on his train to start his tour of duty, he lets the engine run, it charges the compressed air cylinder in the locomotive, and then that is then fed out into the rest of the train. Well, it may take 10 or 15 minutes to charge all those compressed air cylinders on every car. So if you drain a little bit of it by applying the brakes, the charge in that cylinder on every car goes down a little bit, and then it charges back up as you release the brakes and you tool along, much like a compressed air cylinder you would have in your car, for working on your car in your garage. Well, if you apply the brakes multiple times, say you're coming down a steep hill somewhere and you keep applying a little bit of the brakes like you would in a car, that depletes a little bit more of the air from those cylinders, and it doesn't give them enough time to charge back up. And it's possible, if you do that often enough, to actually run out of brakes. You may not have had time to charge up those cylinders again so that you can apply the brakes when you need it the next time. There is another fail-safe system, however, in trains, in that if that should happen, if you hit the emergency stop button, apparently there's two sides to these cylinders. If you hit the emergency stop button, there's an emergency amount of compressed air that doesn't get touched when you just run the normal brakes. That will then apply the brakes on that car and bring it to a stop. So they certainly think of everything. Okay, we've got about 11 miles. Next speed limit is 15 miles an hour in a little over a mile. I see that train on the other track is now moving. I thought it was just stationary, but it's actually pulling away. He was at a passing siding waiting for me to pass. It's pretty cool. Half a mile, we have to be down to 15 miles an hour. So I'm going to put it in idle and we'll coast a little bit. Let me make sure these cars here at this road see me coming. They give the full signal, but they got the message. We have 4/10 of a mile to slow down, and I think it might be necessary now to apply some brakes.